And we are live. Okay, everybody. Back into the tips series. I'm probably not going to be as cohesive because I don't really remember what I said in the last video, but I'm going to try to sort of connect some strings here and explain my sort of thought process on how I feel like I can help you guys come up with ideas. So let's get into that. Just for a quick recap, tip number one was think using inspirations, coming up with little sequences first, little scenes and stuff. You can use it. I use it from music a lot. I use it from a couple of movies. Don't be afraid to be silly, random, all that stuff. They're not going to make sense yet. That's where tip two comes in. Tip two is define. You started to stitch together some of those scenes. By doing that, you could make characters that worked in each one of those scenes. And then your explanations for how your story works would come from the fact that you had conflict between those scenes. And then finally, you wanted a different kind of conflict, which was the conflict of the entire story. A story doesn't work. Focus. A story doesn't work if it doesn't have any conflict. Like it has to have conflict to it. So that's what another big thing that we want to do. So then, tip number three. I just labeled it Three Biguns. So it's basically the beginning, the climax, and the ending. The stuff you learned in English class, It's you gotta analyze, the beginning of the book and the setup and all that stuff, and then, well, I mean, it doesn't have to be a book; it's just a story. And then the climax, what is the big scene? What is the big event that happens? And then the ending, which is the resolution. How does it all work out? Do they win? Do they lose? Is there a winner? All that good stuff. We are going to start with the start. So with the beginning of your story, you've got all these loose scenes now, and you want to start to kind of piece them together. You've got them pieced together a little bit, right? You've got your characters, maybe. You've got a couple of characters that work in between a few scenes. You've got maybe some characters even that have relations with each other, but now is when you really want to start getting into that. You want to start developing your characters to the point where you know exactly where they're going to be for the rest of the story. You know where they're going to be when something bad happens. You know where they're going to be when something good happens. You're just going to have awareness of what your characters are going to do when presented with a situation. When it comes to the story, I like to start with the beginning, right? But you can start with the end. It works just as well. I think I did a couple of my ending scenes before I writ. I'm definitely A plus in English right now. Before I wrote some of my middle scenes, I finished the book. I knew where I was going before I started to go there, and that's a big thing. You get your start, and you establish where they are. But then what I like to do is once I've got the beginning established, I establish the end. I finish the story. Just be like, this is where I want to be. And of course, the ending can be changed. It probably will be changed. I know mine did at least 2 times. That's expected. I mean, that comes from. It's not like human error kind of thing. It comes from you. You're evolving. You're coming up with newer ideas that you're like, oh, this is better. I like this more. Let's establish this as the ending. So you want to get an ending for your story. And if you're not writing a story and you're just kind of making a universe, then it's okay to just go from the beginning and then just go. Just start coming up with stuff, put your characters in random situations, have fun with it. But if you are trying to write like a story, you're trying to like make a story, for whatever it may be in your life. It may be a book, it may be like a TV show that you're totally sponsored to make one day. It all can be created in the same way. And this is just my way. There's other ways to do it. This is just the way that I find the easiest. So, like I said, I like to start from the beginning, then go to the end and finish it, because then you know where you're going. You know where you're trying to get to. You know what you need to do to get your characters from A to B. No matter what happens in the middle, they have to end up at B. They have to get here. So it kind of limits what you're able to do, and it stops you from going a little too outlandish with what you want to do. It's also good for like mysteries. If you're gonna write a story, if you're gonna think of a story about a mystery, to know the answer to the mystery first, there you go. Like that's you have to know that first. Actually, like you can't write the story without knowing the mystery. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to seed the clues that lead to the resolution. You have to know the ending. That's just how I like to do it. I like to start with the end, kind of. Then I just fill in the stuff. When you fill in the stuff, though, you have your characters, you have a couple ideas and scenes that you can kind of hop to, and those scenes allow you to sort of it's like a mini ending. You know where you want to go, so you get there. And with all those little scenes that I had you make, all of the stuff in between those scenes can be used as explanations and or fleshing out of the characters in the story that you've built, right? It allows you to sort of explain the explanations, You came up with these explanations for how these characters did this in tip 1 and 2. You've done all this work to establish these characters. Now you're going to show that work and prove that you have done your homework. Your characters, they are real. Their backstories are fleshed out. They have story. And it's not just like ideas that you came up with and you're just tossing around to the wall and seeing what sticks. Don't do that. Set your story up, write it through, and once you've got those middle parts where you don't know what to write, explain things. Just explain why is this character doing this. Give a little backstory. Flush the world out more and make it more concise. Just make sure that the lore and the story of the overarching universe that you've made, to put it in one way, is consistent and it makes sense, right? It has to be logical, first of all, but it also has to be the same. It has to, it shouldn't change from piece to piece just to fit your narrative. It should be the same. And if your narrative doesn't fit it, then you need to change the logic of the story. Otherwise, if you have 3 different logics of the story going around, they're all going to clash with each other, and it's going to create plot holes, huge plot holes. So you have to make sure you have one concise explanation to everything. For the rest of it, just when you're sort of thinking of the story and getting into like where they're going with it, while there is plenty of space and plenty of reason to fill in, right? Don't waste time. You know, don't like we don't need to know what the character ate last week, right? Like unless it's like, for a joke, obviously, but like why? Like it's a waste of time. Those details don't need to be known. That stuff doesn't need to be mentioned, not let alone like actually pointed out. So when you're talking about these characters, yes, it's always fun to have like, oh, this is this character's favorite food. But if the story is about like, the main character like fighting a battle at the end of the book, like mine, and then I just like go on this tangent of how they like this type of food, like it's unnecessary. It doesn't need to be there. And while there can be some scenes that are funny, and they're meant to be lighthearted, or they're meant to be interesting to show different parts of the character. It doesn't, you just look at the scene a couple of times once you come up with it and be like, is this necessary? Like, does this need to be done to make the story better? Does it make the story better, or does it just fill time? And if it just fills time, it's not really necessary. The reader is just going to be like, why do I care? Why am I reading about this? If it has a payoff later, that's a little different. But if it doesn't, then I would just leave it as it is. I know that was all over the place probably. I'm gonna have to bash my head against the wall in post to try to figure out what the heck I was talking about. But let me give a little summary of what I'm trying to say here. You have the beginning, the climax, and the ending, right? I recommend starting with the beginning a little bit, establishing where your characters are, what they're doing, at the beginning of your story. Then I recommend, just for me and works for others I've seen, going straight to the end of the story and then establishing the end. That way you've got the beginning right here, the end, and then the rest is just getting to the end. It's all getting to that point that you've established. They all need to be there. They all need to be in the conditions that they're in. So that should be a good second step if you're not really sure what to do after you write a beginning, is to write the end. And of course, all of this can change over time. Nothing is set in stone ever, unless you are really, really vindictive about having a specific ending. Just write one, get one done, and then you can kind of lead your way there, and if you want to, you can change it later. But focus on getting a destination first. That should be a big focus of yours. And then once you've got that, you got your beginning, kind of set up, you got your end, that's when you just start filling stuff out. The middle of it should just be fleshing out the universe, explaining the characters, going and hitting those scenes that you made earlier, maybe that you wanted to see in your story, and that's exactly the point in which you would add them. You'd have them in there, maybe it's to fulfill a goal, maybe it's just a fun little scene to throw in there. But, that's what you fill the middle with, and you have to make it so that the character gets from point A to point B consistently, the entire thing makes sense, and it is all explained within the lore that you've established. This universe works this way, and if it ever doesn't work that way, you need to change it so that it stays clean, it stays concise, and it stays, what's another word? I'm blanking. I don't know, proper? Just make sure that when the reader is reading it, they're not like scratching their head the whole time on like, how is that possible kind of thing, right? You don't want to get to the end of a mystery novel, reveal the killer, and then have no bits of evidence of who it is before that. You want to talk about it. And then as for the climax, like I said, or maybe I didn't even say it, I don't know. When it comes to the climax, that's your biggest scene. That's the scene that hits the hardest. It's the turning point of the story. It's either, it's the death of the villain, or it's the sudden realization of who the killer is. Like, that's the big hitter, that's the punchline. So make sure that when you write your climax, you look over it like 20 times once you've written the whole thing, because that is your big takeaway. The whole story is essentially set up for the climax, and then the ending is just talking about the climax as it goes away, But the climax, that's the big thing. For an example of a climax, mine is a huge fight at the end of the book. 2 chapters dedicated to it. It is a major, major thing, and it's the turning point of the book. That's when the heroes win, So focus on that. That's a big, big thing. You should be working on getting to the ending, of course, but the ending is only going to happen with the climax, The climax is what leads to the resolution, the ending. So you've got your beginning. Go to your little dots or whatever, your little scenes, connect them together, make a little sense, have a little fun. Once you get to that climax, that's the big turning point. It's all downhill from there, cools off, relaxes, down into the ending. And, you can have an epilogue, you can have a prologue, you can have whatever you want afterwards. The important thing is that your story should have those 3 things as well. It should have all the things I said before, right? It should have these good scenes and good characters, and it should have conflict. And then the conflict should be solved at the climax. Usually. It does not have to be, but it usually is. And then resolutions, cleaning up afterwards. And that's the story, honestly. Once your beginning is establishing the conflict, climax is usually dealing with the conflict, and then the ending is sort of just like talking about how the conflict's over now. There you go. Those are my three biguns, as I wrote it, or the 3 big things. I don't know what I'm going to title this, because I don't really want to title it 3 biguns, but whatever. Probably rambling, probably a mess. Might not make any sense. We will see when I edit it, and hopefully make it look at least a little decent. I promise there won't be a giant watermark on it this time, at least hopefully. So, thank you for stopping by, thank you for listening, and I will be back with the next tip, which is preparing to write. So, we're finally starting to get these ideas down. We're weeding out the people that want to start a story and the people that actually want to write a story. So we'll definitely get into some interesting topics there. So definitely join in for that, and I hope you have a great day.